Hello, guys. We are here for a small thematical space. Usually, we don't do this. The last time I did that was when David Handling went absolutely loco and used unfounded and non-factual information about the Russian modernization practices and why the modernization was bad, based on the now well-known grifter 18-year-old Favelao. The dude is an absolute trash, and Hamling is a retard for using his information. But that's something that we already covered. No, today we're going to do something that, unfortunately for me, I should have done from the beginning of the war. I did this back then while supporting Bill Rojo, and Bill Rojo, by the month of March, was pointing out that the Russians have basically the time to do whatever they want in the war. Of course, since then we see that while that motto is true and valid, the things have gone into a certain way that for a lot of people right now it's very complicated to see how the Russians have the time to do whatever they want. Once again, guys, I will use a couple of templates. You shouldn't take them at face value. You should go and check what I'm speaking about, what I'm talking about. But the most problematic point here for Ukraine, as I already spoke a little bit, and thank you very much, Denver, yesterday for pointing to me the intricacies of strategic planning and thought behind Russian leadership. My opinion, I said it yesterday, for the Russians, whatever is going to happen after 2025 when it comes to outside of the war, in my opinion, is going to be by a large extent a Asian pivot when it comes to the economy, divestment from Europe. Although the Russian population is not going to appreciate that, and most probably a war to the finish, because for the Russians right now, if we check whatever is going on, uh, there is no way, once again, there is no way for them to stop it, given that the Ukrainians, unless mass mobilization, therefore an absolute meltdown of the Ukrainian demographics and the Ukrainian economy right now, simply these guys wouldn't last past 2025. And therefore we are going to have a look at the article that the three copers, Darmasiko, Kaufman, and Lee have penned for War on the Rocks. The article is rather bad. It is bad because it's using obvious fallacies. So, for instance, they open the article about shell hunger on the Ukrainian side by pointing a pastiche that was done on CNN by showing they had only 4 illumination rounds to fire from their positions. While the shell hunger and the lack of artillery is being visible, it's being felt. Uh, that's not the truth, guys. They are not down to that point. What the real problem is, we've already insisted as teamwork criminal on this one. We made the calculus, we made everything that you want. On full effective charges, most of the Ukrainian park that was donated, so 155 millimeters or 105, should be at roughly 40% to 30% amortization if there is no loss. Basically, whatever the Ukrainians have right now is either destroyed or overused. So the biggest situational awareness for Ukraine is that, first of all, it's not that much, don't have that many ammunition, even if they don't have it. It's simply whatever they have as means to fire those things are overused and are beyond what normally on peacetime you would accept as a crooked barrel. We had one article prior to that on, I think it was The Economist, or Politico, one of the two, which said that we need to simplify ammunition production so Ukrainians can lob it to the Russians, even though it's not perfectly to the exquisite Western standards, because at the end it's not to be used by a fine-tuned barrel, but an overused, overworn barrel on Ukrainian side. And that also says exactly what I Team War Criminal have been saying for so long. The problem with the Ukrainians is that they are engaged in a artillery war, which has never been the strong point of the NATO alliance. Most of the NATO quote unquote doctrine has been dominate the sky, crush from above, and then let the creepers go on and clear the area. Well, for starters, let's go now to the article itself. The article itself is an absolute abomination, and I already did a couple of small posts on it. The start is, of course, the cope point that everybody is doing now on Ukrainian side, which is, oh, we failed our counteroffensive. Uh, okay, don't say this to Ermak on the Ukrainian side, because he would say that you're wrong, that the counteroffensive accomplished whatever they wanted to do, because this whole thing was to get the Black Sea Fleet to go away and to destroy a couple of radars and kill a couple of major personnel in Crimea. This, of course, in my opinion, is very wrong. You know what I said. If those big wigs get killed because they get complacent, the next guys are not going to get that complacent, but with a major issue that on top of not being that complacent, they are going to go after you for blood, because you basically kill their comrades. In sometimes you kill the dead weight, so you just liberated a certain force, and in this case the force, as we've seen recently, is for evil. Russians are learning, Russians are getting worse when it comes to rules of combat, which we at the Team War Criminal have already said. The longer it goes, the lesser the Russians are gonna be restrained in what they do. And that means that whereas the Russians would capture a lot of people in 2022 and early 2023, since probably the month of June, July 2023, the Russians have been doing nasty things to prisoners of war, mostly because of the Ukrainian public relation campaign since the start of the war, which was basically dehumanizing Russians, humiliating them, killing them, pretending not to take pretending to take prisoners, but actually not taking them. If you want a example, look at the latest Scope video from the 47th Separate Brigade, supposedly punishing a Russian unit who allegedly had killed surrendering prisoners of war. The story of that one is a lot more complicated, which is basically Mobiks going to the dugout, having surrounded Ukrainians, asking for surrender. One guy comes out trying to actually kill the lone parley Russian, gets shot. Russian also gets shot. Then the rest of the Russian unit literally fuck up everything that's there, get them out, and then, well, they execute them. So once again, this is not any way in condemning the situation. In my opinion, and as I always said, you are in a hot phase of combat. Whatever you're doing, if something happens that is unforeseen and traumatic, it's going to get ugly very fast. And it happens on both sides. On that aspect, I have no issue recognizing that in some terms Ukrainians are going to do something that it's also logical. However, for the Ukrainians, it has been a practice, a policy to show Russian suffering, Russian dying, Russian in pieces. It has been part of their shock and awe public relation campaign. A lot of people is going to say, yeah, but what stops the Russians from doing that? Apparently, initially, the Russian Ministry of Defense was completely clueless on that. So if you see early on the war, first there were very little images. We discovered that there were, a pretty awful one with a couple of compilations for SSO units literally doing October 7th kind of scenes with Ukrainian military intelligence and so-called top units. And then it trickled down to a point in 2023 when probably the Russians said, fuck this, we're going to start showing as much as we can, or as much as we should. So what with the cope? The cope is we failed our counteroffensive, but the Russian offensive in Donbass is failing as well. As I said, the biggest problem with this logic is that we saw that with the year 2022 and the start of the attacks on Bakhmut, now Artemovsk. The Russian logic is not stopping where the Ukrainians are stopping for three main reasons. First main reason that will also be explained in the same article by these clowns. Russians have a lot more to spare. Russians control in large part their supply lines. So basically, even if they lose 10,000 trucks, they're going to build 10,000 more. They have the money. The cost of this production initially was thought to be backbreaking. I've been the first to say in 2022 that the Russians could have taken a huge loan from China between $3 and $450 billion to basically um, go on with the war. This loan, of course, with offsets. That means that it wouldn't be cash, but it would be material, non-military material bought in China, subcomponents, trucks, steel parts, titanium parts, even fucking engines for their Sukhois. It would have been a lot better, in my opinion, back then to have this exchange by having the Chinese have a bigger interest in that. And of course, the offset would have been the Chinese would buy oil and gas from Russia, which would have put everybody on an even footing. However, the Russians went the other way. They leveraged whatever they won during 2022 and part of 2023 on oil and gas into a double expense. The first one, they sustained their currency, which was pretty logical. That was done in 2022 via a forced conversion of hard currencies, dollar, euros, whatever, into ruble if they want to buy gas and oil. That policy was working in 2022 because the sanctions when it came to Russian gas and oil were still unpalatable for Europe. Now that ship has sailed. The Russian share on the market for both products is officially between 4 and 5%, unofficially probably between 11 and 15%. There are reasons for that. We're going to speak about that on Monday, but today we're going to mostly focus on the nonsense that our friends are had a small guy coming in with a phone. Holy shit, guys! It's Saturday. Please, I'm not working on Saturday. But the fun part is the following: the Russians, as I humorously said at some point, were apparently well better prepared economically for this war than militarily. And it took them between 6 and 12 months to completely re-gear the kind of war they wanted, which once again shows that the goal for the Russians wasn't to conquer the whole of Ukraine. Otherwise, they would have prepared a stronger force and would have geared the economy for a sustained occupation. They never did that. A sustained occupation, if they had to, cover 40% of Ukraine on the eastern of the Dnieper, would have meant more police forces available to sustain the occupation. You have to know that a lot of policemen on the occupied, so-called occupied or annexed areas, call it as you want, had to be screened. The screening was pretty poor, let's be honest, because all over 2022 on the Ukrainian side of the Kherson Oblast right now, the Russians managed to nab probably between 400 and 800 military or police personnel who were away of location without leave and who had weapons in their dachas or their houses, basically uh, a putting down a serious internal security risk for a long-term occupation. That means that whatever had happened when the Russian occupied, it was extremely chaotic. The whole point, as I said, was probably going to Nikolaev, grabbing whatever was there, blocking the Ukrainians beyond Yuzhno, and then sanctuarizing Kherson Oblast and part of Nikolaev Oblast. Anyway, let's go back. Russians weren't prepared in 2022. The turnaround took between 6 and 12 months. It really hit the stride roughly around April 2023. We had discussions with it. There were spaces on this on previous iterations of this account. Snake came through, gave data. I agree with him completely. Accurate assessment. We had also multiple sources, including pro-Ukrainian sources, lamenting the fact that Ukrainians weren't able to do what the Russians were doing, which was mobilizing almost every kind of factory that was doing steel work or electronic work for the war. And now we are to the point where, despite everything, the Russians are sitting on a situation, a plateau of war means, which by no estimates right now could be said to be their complete peak. Quite the contrary, I expect in 2024, with an even heavier budget, tip towards the war effort to actually at least double the output of everything when it comes to the mechanized warfare side of the question. But most importantly, a large investment on non-line of sight systems. When it comes to that, there are a lot of lacunes, a lot of issues that Russians haven't been able to address. One of them is giving the troops something easy to employ on a non-objective line of sight system, except FPVs. FPVs are nice. The problem with FPVs, once again, is that the charge they embark most of the time now is extremely limited, and if you put larger charges over 5 kilograms, then you need both repeaters, larger batteries, and so on. So the battery that you're going to put on that FPV plus your warhead is going to tip you down and lower your speed, worsen your maneuverability, and everything. So what I'm hinting at is that there are multiple systems that the Russians have had as designs. One of them was the ATGM Autonomia, which is in development since for fucking ever. And then you see Hezbollah just like popping a Almaz 3, like, hello guys, there we are. Perfect, uncooled CCD, firm targeting, absolute masterpiece of clarity when it comes to the seeker. And you need to know it's a lot better than what the Israelis had on their first and second generation of Spike Year, Spike MR. How well it will perform in a completely different environment like Ukraine, that's something else to be still seen, but the Russians haven't even made a attempt to go there. So, as I said, there are still lacunes, of course, there are still shortcomings for the Russians, and they are still not looking at the most important part, which is trying to put their infantry in a position where they wouldn't need to rely on radio frequencies, because that's the biggest issue that we have right now on both sides, is that electrical warfare is advancing pretty fast. Ukrainians just announced that supposedly they neutralized 2 Shahids via electronic warfare. I do not believe that. What I do believe, though, is that the Cometa no gain antennas at some point are going to be kaduk. But once again, it has been the same for Ukrainians since the beginning. When they used the Mugins, they were losing over 60% of their Mugins to electronic warfare. Now it has become a bit more complicated because it's choosing other targets, like they did in Tuapse, and using waypoints all over the Black Sea. And this is afforded, unfortunately, by the fact that NATO owns half of it. So on this aspect, the Russians have still a lot of strides to commit. But let's go back to the article, because we frayed way beyond the scope of the space. And so the article is named, sorry guys, because I had, for once I had made a huge paper for that, guys. I'm really sorry for this. I usually do not analyze with a large um, afterthought of it. I just go with the first draft because I think it's the most truthful. And afterward, if you need to review some things, it can be done on the Q&A, and also it can be done by having a discussion both with the more criminal guys, but also with a different kind of approach. So, as I said, the biggest problem with the whole build and strike, a vision for rebuilding Ukraine's future advance 2024, is, in my opinion, that whatever they are tasking Ukraine with, which is building defense lines, trying to spare both equipment and men, is actually something that Ukraine has been doing since the beginning. For now 2 years of war, almost 2 years, Ukrainians have been on the defensive for over 70% of the time. And the problem with this is that at the beginning they had a huge advantage because they could be mobile, and the Russians didn't have their own defensive lines. The best vision for this is how the Ukrainians, by putting a lot of meat and well-timed strikes and well-timed new found means by the US, could roll over the occupied areas of the Kharkov Oblast. They started small, around Chuguiv and Stary Saltov. They tried to go to the Russian border right away with Kazachi Lopan. They got absolutely as blasted there with the first images of the T-90M have been completely annihilating the upcoming company that was trying to push over. Then they tried, instead of going towards the Russian border immediately, they tried to go east. That went a lot better. It took some time because, as you know, they managed to finally go beyond Chuguiv by roughly May 2022. After May, from May to roughly August, they had these huge issues trying to go through the Sherwood Forest around Izum, and then they tried the Russian positions around Izum, Balakleya, and then in September the push happened, and in a matter of days they recovered a rather large swath of territory, and in a matter of weeks they managed to reach the Kharkov Oblast limits, and Russia had to mobilize. At the meantime, they had problems with the Kherson Oblast, but as I already said, Kherson Oblast was already lost since March. The Kherson Oblast beyond the Dnieper, of course, because of their failure to capture or have more defensive positions around Nikolaev. So, once you see this, you ask yourself, what else could Ukraine stabilize front-wise? We've had multiple threads on that, which show that Ukraine, since the beginning, had extensive defensive works all over the areas of combat. And the problem that we have here is the following. Where is the extra defensive line volume coming from, and where should it be? Trapped Iron had this in our private group, had this idea that maybe the Russian plan wasn't as ambitious as I put up in October last year, which is not going to be a huge push of 50 kilometers and try to get the cities right away. But the most important plan is to get a plastron in front of Donetsk and all the Donetsk area, which would include also Konstantinovka, probably being close to Ugledar from the east and north, and going as deep as possible, having the Oskol as a natural border. We spoke about that yesterday. However, all those defensive lines on the area plus the natural barriers are already there. So on behalf of everybody, I hope on Teamwork Criminal Crew, we don't understand where exactly they want to push that. The only thing that you're going to do is actually build more of these defensive lines, but building more of these defensive lines is an indication that you're planning to lose some of their first contact lines. which, especially around Avdiivka, is going to be a certainty because the Russians have decided Avdiivka got to go. So once again, yeah, of course, natural boundaries, defenses, whatever you want. If you want to spare men, it's all good. I kind of agree with that. But you already had your overmax. The only meaningful plan for more natural trenches, bears, whatever you want, is if you're planning that the Russian onslaught is going to grind over and take over some of your defensive lines. This, however, in my opinion, is a very bad plan. And I'm going to tell you why. Just look at Artyomovsk/Bakhmut. The Russians never had the time to create their own defensive lines there. But since May 2023, the Ukrainians haven't managed to get back to the city. Not even one guy. Why? Because the Russians used part of the fortifications that Ukrainians had made for themselves. So the situation is going to be the exact following. If you put these fortifications on the back by thinking that you're going to fall back if you lose your first line, you are going to have the exact contrary of what happened in Zaporozhye this year. The Russians would leave their fortifications where there was no other way. So where they were killed, they couldn't fight anymore, or when they couldn't actually inflict enough damage to the Ukrainians because whatever position they were in was not proper or not tenable. Ukrainians mentally are doing the exact contrary. We remember Michael Kopman saying the Russians are doing it wrong. They're not defending in depth. And I'm like, bro, the defense in depth in Zaporozhye was suicide because although they have a little bit of range, it allows the Ukrainians to bring forth their HIMARSs, and so basically absolutely ruin the backline, the backfield. And I explained that yesterday in a positional warfare. When it goes to deep strikes, the more you reduce your area of maneuver, the more of you're going to be in a smaller area, and the easier it's going to be for the guys up front to hit you because that's the space that you have. Instead of, as I said, placing one guy for 1 square kilometer, you're going to have 10 guys for 1 square kilometer, which means basically you're going to be more visible, so more strikeable. In this case, the Ukrainians, by shortening their lines, because that the whole point is actually they don't want to tell it, but they are saying it differently. If you establish rear lines, you're going to be able to put more dumps within 10, 20 kilometers, so the last mile for the Ukraine is going to be better. And I'm like, yeah, please do it. The Russians did the same mistake in 2022, and they were visited by HIMARS almost every single fucking day, and dumps were going up. And we're not speaking about only small depots here. We're speaking about within 20, 30 kilometers of that rather large pool of vehicles, ammunition, and men. This, in replacement, was answered by the Russians by just literally pulling back, which meant that the more advanced units would have it very difficult after a couple of weeks of fighting to be resupplied. And what happens when your supplies are low? You're gonna get an onslaught on your face, you lose your position, and you're gonna start fleeing in panic and creating a rout, which almost happened for the Ukrainians in September 2022. This is what the Ukrainians actually are not doing in Avdiivka. They have understood, despite what everyone said about Avdiivka not being strategic, Ukrainians are putting a hell of a fight around Stepove. They want absolutely the Russians not to move forward towards Kalinove and towards Ocheretine because there's the gap. I put the maps of the fortifications. I have already said that in October before we knew the exact extent of the map. Not, once again, it's not about being smart, guys. It's just about understanding what this war is turning into. It's from the beginning, a war is a logistical issue. But the most important part with this is that on top of the logistical issue, for both sides, there is a political calculus. On one side, Ukraine want to hold on Donbass as fucking hell because they want to have this legitimacy uh, questioning for the Russians. You pretend to defend all of Donbass, you don't have it. On the other side, the Russians saying the exact same country. Like, you say that you are the rightful owner of Donbass, but you have nothing in Donbass anymore. So the exact contrary is in Kherson. Russians are literally defending Kherson, and there is no problem there. They have most of Kherson, but Kherson city is on the other bank. And the most valuable, um, I'd say, point for Kherson is the irrigation canal for Crimea, if we want to be like down to earth. Of course, there are other stuff because it connects then with Zaporozhye and Energodar and whatever. But for Kherson, what the Russians owe right now is strategic buffer and water supply for the Crimean Peninsula. That those are the two single things. Of course, then in the Kinburg Spit, it allows to choke the Black Sea access for Ukraine. But as I said, it has become a lot more complicated to affect that traffic, since the Ukrainians now are not going to have a lot of ships, almost none, single digit per month, going to Yuzhno, going to Zalizny, Chernomorsk, and Odessa. Most of those ships are going to the Danube Delta, so Ismail, Reni, and so on. Therefore, and I'm going to repeat it, uh, Kherson right now has exhausted its strategic value for the Russians. It could have been a lot better if the air defenses, the means to interdict the naval traffic, maritime traffic towards Odessa, and the military activity on Odessa were stymied. But unfortunately, that never happened. And I explained that you need to be Nikolaev for that, to threaten all that part from Ochakiv and down. Unfortunately, once again, it never happened, and we have to make peace with what we have right now. On the other part, uh, Ukrainians hold an empty Kherson, the city, and the rear part is being literally plummeted by Russian strikes. In 2.5 months, the wrong bank of the Dnieper River, so the Ukrainian-owned Kherson Oblast, has seen more artillery being destroyed that Ukraine had lost in total the last 6 months. And all that to defend these bridgeheads on Dachi area, on Gola Pristan, which had a very short lifespan, in Krinky, Kozak back in the summer. So all this, no, not Kozak Kozak camps, Kozak Lageri. So all those small things are creating a devastation and loss for Russians, but on the same time they're having causing a huge problems for strategic in this war, strategic means for Ukraine. Losing 50 barrels in 2.5 months in such a small area, almost one per day, although on footage we're seeing a lot more than one per day, because the Russians at some point start dumping Lancets left and right. But the thing is the following: how is Ukraine going to benefit from a defensive standpoint? You're seeing it on Kherson. Ukraine is true, it's not losing a lot of tanks, not losing a lot of APCs, IFVs, whatever you want to call it, but they're losing long-range strategic assets in this war for them. Artillery is gone. Um, a lot of people that were well trained and were also daring enough, because that's the thing, guys who are getting killed in Krinky, these people want to fight. All these guys who are getting bombed on the other side of the Dnieper, these guys are crazy enough to cross by knowing that, unlike, I don't know, in Zapo or in Avdiivka or whatever, there is no land connection. You're gonna have to fucking swim minimum 600 meters twice if you want to get to the other side, if your boat gets shagged. So on this aspect, the people who are they're losing Krinky are actual real, I say, ideology uh, driven guys. Okay, you're gonna have some meat in there, but most of these guys want to go and fight. So you're sacrificing a hard part, and therefore, if this is a template for the year 2024 on the defensive side, it's gonna be a huge problem. That's my opinion. Most importantly, if Krinky is a lab for the future of the Ukrainian army in 2024, it's also a very bad lab because in Krinky they have the higher ground on their bank against the Russians on the left bank. So what exactly is Krinky good for if you're not sparing your artillery means, if you're not actually gaining a real experience? Because what's going on in Krinky is that for one successful operation, a couple of days, when SSO kills a small outpost of Russians, the same SSO, when they try to go back, they get fucking hate dropped. Of course, there was the loss of the Dnieper Group FPV command. There was the other strike on Sudoplatov on the training ground. But most of it is the same. Russians are just going to put another fucking 20, 22 years old with a FPV remote control, and they're going to fuck your ass once again. So on the aspect, whatever the Ukrainians are trying to learn in Krinky, it's not going to be adaptable. For instance, in Avdivka, they lost the south part of the city, and they are now in the lower ground, which are trying to dislodge the Russians by trying to press tanks. Remember one thing: if you saw the latest footage of the Korn group with those two tanks trying to hit on Russian positions, you see there everything that people mock the Russians for. Solo tanks, no infantry support, trying to do something by their own, getting hit, pulling back. And it's not the first time it happens. They did just the same around the water treatment plant in under the slag heap. And the same happened. They tried to push Russians away. Russians went away. Tanks got hit. Tanks pulled back. Now the Russians have gotten the area where the tanks were trying to operate back there. So my biggest concern is that I don't know how these three guys are understanding these problems. And I'm going to illustrate that with the follow-up of the article. These guys are waking up to a reality that Timur Criminal had been speaking for now a year. They are waking up to that shit in 2024, guys. And most importantly is the part when they are speaking about the fact that Ukraine needs to streamline its APC, its AAVs actually. Why? They say that they have multiple tanks, they have 14 different types of artillery, and so on and so on. So the maintenance is becoming a nightmare. If you guys can recall, one of the first spaces over the counter in late April, May, we said back then that given the absolute patchwork of vehicles and absolutely trash orbit design, Ukrainians were going to run into trouble if there was no advance very soon. And this is what happened actually. And it happened for both purely battlefield realities, but also through the fact that if you are the MTO, and once again, it was obvious. I'm not saying we're fucking geniuses. No, 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 no. Quite the contrary. That shit was maybe the most obvious. If you're gonna have 4 different type of tanks of 4 different manufacturers, on top of your already 4 different type of tanks, because they had T-80s, T-64s, T-72s, and some T-62s plus some captured T-90, T-90Ms. So they had already like 10 different makes of tanks: Leopard 1s, Leopard 2s, A-Force Challengers, and Abrams. Of course, the Abrams apparently never made it to the front line for the 47th, but yeah, whatever. So you have all this fucking 10 different types of tanks. You already have no own industry capable of finishing those. I've already pointed out that the situation, despite every bombardment with Kharkov, Vermont, was still problematic for the Russians because they apparently had managed for the year 2023 to produce at least 130 sets of refurbished transmission gears. Hopefully, I said it's one unit. So for people who know how it works, you had two coils of transmission sets, one on the left, one on the right, going to the rear for the Soviet legacy tanks from Object 432 beyond. So hopefully it was only 65 transmissions in total, which would still be logical because, I mean, they first need to find them, refurbish them, but also need to ship them, which is a problem. But even if it was 130 transmissions, the Ukrainians had lost more tanks than that. So basically, if you had the tanks lost plus whatever would need to be refurbished, that meant that about 500 to 600 tanks were affected for a whole year. That at some point or another during the year were not available to the troops. Well, if they already have that problem with their legacy tanks, so they could only service 130 tanks for the year, imagine what happens when you have problems with Western tanks, especially the Leopard family, which has always been a problem given that Kraus Maffei Wegemann has always gone through with a definitive spare parts planning. So you need to tell them exactly how many they want. It wasn't like, okay, you know what, we're gonna fucking produce 700 spare part kits, and then whoever wants them, they can have them. No, this is what Kraus Maffei Wegemann had done since 2006. This is also what created a lot of problem with the Greeks at some point, because the Greeks wanted transfer of technologies for some parts, but for others they couldn't. This is also what caused problems with the Koreans with the MTU, which was used for their K9, and then after that they tried to also use it for their K2 tanks. Once again, Kraus Maffei, trying to protect their golden goose, asked for specific requests. And on top of this, they themselves made pretty misleading statements, as we can see right now in the war, that servicing and whatever could be done within X kilometers or X hours. We are seeing with what Germans themselves say, all these tanks piling up in Lithuania, not being repaired or being repaired slowly, is that either Ukrainians, as I said, are stupid and don't know how to use the tanks, or the tank itself is not well adapted to the realities they are facing, or simply, and both three things can be true, the Germans lied on their mean time between failures and mean time between maintenance time lapses. And there we go. You have to solve that. And this doesn't require for Ukraine to make like grand fucking plans. You need to give Ukraine a unified platform. That unified platform, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, could have been the Abrams. If you pull out all the trash that you gave them and send back the Leopards, and honestly, the Leopard tank is not a bad tank, quite the contrary. The problem is that it was oversold, it was overhyped, and then you managed to get into this trash heap of tactically ill employment, mismanagement of the park, huge problems when it comes to also the follow-up with the tank. A lot of destroyed or abandoned tanks are still on the field, and we could see though that even by the Ukrainians themselves using FPVs to hunt Russian infantry that unfortunately still want to see what the fuck a Leopard looks like. So all these small things make it that if you want to do something for Ukraine, then you need to review not what Ukraine is going to do, but your own plan. So basically, you need to pull back the Leopards and send Abrams, and not 100, 200, 300. You need to re-equip complete Ukraine with a completely different type of tanks. So 2024 is not going to be enough because, first of all, you need to refurbish at least 600 to 700 Abrams tanks. This is my view, guys. I'm not saying that that's what they're saying. I'm just saying what the problem is. And then on top of that, instead of using the Marders, all the Marders could be, you know, coupled with the Leopards into so-called German brigades and then American brigades. You just fucking give them Bradleys. You have enough Bradleys for that, allegedly. So, what's the matter? The matter is that Ukraine is employing in a very short time frame a lot more assets per engagement that they should, and losing them in the process. As we said during Zaporozhye, the first 2 months, the employment and burn rate was over 69%. Basically, Ukrainians would use whatever equipment, go to the attack, lose 70% of that shit, to return back with whatever was remaining. Sometimes not 100%. I mean, there was this attack in Urozhanye. I don't know if you guys remember. It was a lead tank, 5 MRAPs. Every single MRAP got lit up. The lead tank went back. And on those, you had 24 guys KIA, and I think only 8 made it back to the base. I can find you the footage. I can also find you the 6 guys next to a destroyed, I think was a Wolfhound. I'm not sure, but basically a destroyed British map. Then what is even this about? If Team War Criminal is disparaging whatever the plan is for Ukraine. Well, as I said, the biggest problem with this is that on the equipment side, Ukraine needs a full re-equipment to have any valid shot in 2025 to do that. Now that would depend on what are you guys going to re-equip them with? Because on one side, the tank issue is a problem. APC a bit less because finally, when you think it through, there are only 3 types of APC that the Ukrainians can get: CV90, Marder, Bradley. Okay, we can speak about Puma, Ajax, whatever. Okay, Ajax doesn't exist anyway, but or a Warrior. But the main point here is that on the IFV side, it's already way better. Of course, it's not better when it comes to the capabilities of these systems, because, for instance, the CV90s that got have a 40 millimeter Bofors, which is an antiquated gun, do not have a commanding panoramic sight, independent one. And honestly, you are in the 80s with that shit. Okay, your command and control, whatever, is fine, but some of the things that thing can do are completely irrelevant. And okay, you have this a thermal blanket on top of it, but we saw that it didn't change anything. First engagement, 2 were shagged, 1 was captured. That's how it goes. So that there too, the Ukrainians need to, and there I'm gonna agree with the 3 copers here. Ukrainians need to say also what they need, because what I'm getting at is that the type of warfare Ukrainians are fighting right now, and we're going to leave for the moment drones and air force on one side. We're just going to speak about the ground war. The type of war that Ukrainians are having in their hands right now is completely disadvantaging them. It's disadvantaging them because there is at least one system on the Russian side which is actually unopposable right now. And remember, early 2023, they were laughing by saying that chicken coop wire could stop Lancets. Bitch, where are you now? The Russians, with the Lancet threat, have replaced a whole helicopter wing. They have made sure that they do not have to spend money, $100,000, on a Izdelia 305 to take out a fucking tank or a fucking artillery piece, and not put the helicopters in danger close areas. They just fucking launch that stuff. Wait until they find you out, because the loitering time is apparently at least 45 minutes, as we have spoken way before early in the war. And in 45 minutes, you can find a lot of people and a lot of things. I would like for the Russians to have more of Lancets and less of FPVs. I already said that. But the Ukrainians still do not have an answer for that thing. And now with the self-targeting units that apparently new Lancets have, it's even useless to even try electronic warfare. You could try and take out the Zala 421, who serve as a both repeater and targeting system. But once the Lancet is in descent, the only thing that's going to happen is you're lucky and that thing pre-detonates or hits a branch or whatever. We saw that more recently with the crab firing, or it was AS-90. It fired its load, put itself on its protective canopy, but Lancet has seen it, just descended nicely on a canted angle, went through the canopy, hit the AS-90 turret, fire started. And that AS-90 maybe didn't blow up, but that thing's going to be out of work for a couple of weeks at least. That's what the Lancet offers you. Is it spectacular? Is it a HIMARS strike? No. Does it force the enemy out of combat anyway? Yes. Does it cost $1 million a pop? Nope. This is the problem for Ukraine right now. Maybe the Russian capability is just good enough. But that's your problem. It's good enough. It costs less. They can make it out of shitty parts. Dishwasher if you want. And in the fucking, and this I need to thank Shai Murato for this. In the fucking article, you see like, yeah, Western companies are testing their products, but in small batches. I'm like, bro, what the fuck? They should be incentivized by Western government to produce more so they can be tested in Ukraine by having these Western governments pay top dollar for this equipment to be then sent in Ukraine, but also kept for them when things go quiet. And I'm like, bro, that's the whole point why all these governments don't want to do it, because they do not want to spend top dollar. And for whatever reason, Ukraine loses, Russia wins, Ukraine wins, Russia loses. The capacity to produce all this shit is there and need to fire people, dismantle whatever was existing. The whole point of the reduced capacity on European NATO was the dividends of peace. Basically, there was peace, there was no foreseeable war, and whatever Russia was doing, it was in their fucking side of the European continent. But now, as I said multiple times, you're going to invest billions for artillery. NAMO had estimated that between 100 and 150 billion euros. You're going to produce whatever you want to produce, and then in 2-3 years, the war stops, but you are left with your huge white elephant investment that now you need to either curate, either liquidate, either find another war for that. And yeah, of course, there is another war probably brewing against China because of the loss of economic might on the Western Bloc. But that's a completely different approach. You're not going to fight China with artillery unless they're already in Taiwan, or China tries to expand in a land war. But look around it. Where is China trying to expand? South Korea, Vietnam, both of them are a completely different approach. And China can just use its proxy with South Korea, while Vietnam doesn't want a war. They're not capable of sustaining a war. Plus, once again, supplying Vietnam would have to be done by shipping lanes. Look at what's going on with the Red Sea. Just saying. And once again, I'm not sustaining that China and Vietnam are going to have a war. I'm saying that where you're going to have a land war against China, where you would use artillery at 30, 40 kilometer range. That's the context. So don't misinterpret this. And for Taiwan, it's gonna be a amphibious war anyway. Same for Japan, if ever China wants to go to Japan, but China doesn't need that. Both countries, Korea and Japan, are perfect plastrons for China. They are perfect glacis. They are completely taking out American. They were, because now it's being changed. They were completely taking out American industrial capability, and they were also tackling European industrial capability. Why China would ever try and do anything about South Korea or Japan? If you look well for the upcoming technologies, so EV batteries, rare earth, and all that stuff, China and South Korea are now a real monopoly. So why would you do that? You have what you wanted in Asia. And same thing for Taiwan. Putting pressure on Taiwan and putting it under the spotlight without the war also help the Americans divest and divert the expenditure in a place where they shouldn't actually be focusing. And you end with a crisis in the US, a internal crisis over something that is also happening in Europe, but is not creating this standoff between central federal government and a federate state. What America is having with Texas is a Lampedusa moment. The Spaniards have the same issue with Ceuta Melilla and all these fucking fluxes. Greeks had the problem with the Syrian influx, and they still keep going with that. In Europe, we have that problem, but we're not. Nobody's actually doing anything because how the system is fucked up with the fake centralization with the EU. So when it comes to the plan from these three guys, let's say three copers for Ukraine, the most important point and the most true, actually, argument is Russia needs to lose its main advantages, and that is the fact that it has strategic depth, so that basically it could have factories 4, 5, 600 kilometers from the front line being basically untouched and just blurting out equipment, bad or good, doesn't matter. It's still equipment. It's still around people. Having a uncontested border with China, which is now the manufacturer of the world. So basically for FPVs and all that stuff, they don't need to. And the only way to do that is strategic strikes. So you need to give Ukraine extremely long-range weapons with proper warheads. Sending some flying trash with 10, 20 kilogram warhead, the only thing that you're going to do that, you're going to maybe put out of work one or other's workshop, or you're gonna hit, as it happened a couple of times, a condensate or the fracking chamber when it comes to refineries or gas transits. That thing's gonna be repaired within 1 or 2 weeks. So on the long run, these are just mosquito bites. Of course, they are problematic. Nobody's saying they're not, but they are mosquito bites. The real damage can only be done by sending a 100, 200, 300 Tomahawk missiles every night for months. Ukraine doesn't have that. America doesn't have that. Russia itself is finding it the hard way that dumping as much as they want on Ukraine, it's still not taking Ukraine out of the equation. However miserable life is for Ukrainians, however problematic supply is for Ukrainian armed forces, and however force generation is for Ukrainian armed forces. So the whole article is, honestly, it's hilarious and relies on a mental condition that hasn't changed since 2022. Remember what was said once upon a time? The Russian army is never the 20-foot tall giant or the 6-foot tall dwarf. It's never as strong or as weak as people talk about it. It's a grinding machine. The Russian Federation is a grinding machine. Are there going to be problems? Um, that's the problem that I'm having with the article. So my analysis here is the following: these people haven't understood the core situation where Ukrainians are. So that's it. That's the main problem here. The moment they're gonna understand what the core situation is, that's the moment where Ukrainians are going to accept the reality that the only way to win is a two-way, two-lane plan. On one side, they need to fucking have counterattacks in 2024 in Donbass to stop the Russians from getting the land they want and put themselves in a at least negotiation position that would be a lot better. On the other side, they should hold their lines on the south, because I think the Russians, one day, would have put Ukrainians in a very delicate position up on Donbass. They are going to try and try and clear out the whole Ugledar area by pushing on Zaporozhye and then turning around toward southern Donetsk. This is the biggest problem. They tried this with the Ugledar push in order to go towards Kurakov and all that stuff, but so far it didn't work. However, and I'm going to repeat this, if they succeed by the east and then go from south and come from north for Ugledar, you have a huge problem. And that needs to be stopped if you're the Ukrainian army. Because as I said, your political and military goals are to literally still be alive in Donbass. You tried Zaporozhye, it doesn't work. Now, on the other aspect, what is the new fangled, interesting, super duper air force going to bring to the table? In my opinion, given the scarce employment of the JDAM ERs that were given to Ukraine and the over reliance on HIMARS missiles, I don't think it's going to change very much. It will make it more costly for the Russians, but we're going to have exchange of kills. And my opinion is that if that starts to happen and we see carcasses of F-16 dropping from the sky, the mental barrier that has been within Ukrainian psyche, which is, and this has been always the problem, every time they had a Western weapon, with the exception of HIMARS, every time it has backfired on them. They hyped the Leopards, it went to shit. They hyped the 777, it went to shit. They hyped every single SPG from the West. Those have been going to shit. They're gonna start hyping the F-16s if, I hope it happens, on the first engagement they get shot down and ambushed. Mentally, that would be a very, very hard point. And this is why things like Bayraktar initially and the HIMARS after that were so central to the PR mythology on the Ukrainian side. You break that one, like it happened with the HIMARS, and let it happen with the Bayraktar pretty soon. And we're learning now that Bayraktars from the month of March were a single digit flying. Then it's done. Of course, the escalation is going to reach, because that's what they're saying. They're saying that you need the strategic strikes. So at some point, they're gonna float out tomahawk strikes. They're gonna float out, if not straight up involvement in 2024, 2025. They're gonna start and try to sell GSOs, tomahawks, whatever. This escalation that I thought Americans would stop it apparently has no brakes. And this whole essay goes, in my opinion, towards there. My biggest concern is that if you do that and you lob tomahawks into Russia proper, you literally make the case for a nuke strike. And whoever is looking at this, there is no way you're gonna fucking start telling me that it's just to defend Ukraine. This is not the defense of Ukraine, because what the Americans are going towards is accepting and agreeing that, okay, a lot of Ukrainians are going to die, but the whole point is to defeat Russia. So in the process of defeating Russia is to break Ukraine. That's not how you defend something. It's literally, I'm going to burn my house so you're not going to get it. Well, does it really matter? The other guy still has his house, but you don't. And this is how counterproductive all these pieces are becoming. And this is where we are going if nothing is being done. And I don't care about negotiations anymore. I thought literally that Ukrainians were going to be smart. But with their PR posture and the most recent perfidy attack, where they hoped they would hit Russian big wigs on that EL-76, but Russians at the latest moment swapped, which in my opinion makes it feel like they knew they had a mole, is exactly where Ukraine is right now. It's a petty, untrustable pig nation where unfortunately the only solution right now is not only military defeat, is a humiliating military defeat. Is it gonna take more Russians dead? Yes, for sure, but we just saw it with the EL-76. These people not only are not to be trusted, but they will exploit any of your weaknesses to hurt you. And therefore, there is no way out of this. The only way out is the cessation of hostilities from the Ukrainian side, signature of a cessation of territorial claims. And we saw Zelensky is going for historical lands of the Ukrainians in Russia. So there we are. We are literally in a extermination war on the proper sense, because they now want to conquer Russian territories. On that aspect, Russia has everything it needs to declare a war and just go, I'm sorry guys, but hardcore on Ukraine. And I think 2024 is just gonna show that. And I hope that we're gonna see somewhere between April and June a complete exhaustion of the first line troops that would force the West to either do a folly, which is intervene in a way or another, or like put a leash on Zelensky, in the hope of Putin being stupid enough to accept any kind of ceasefire. That's it. That's so yeah, guys. I'm not gonna take questions today. It was just to make a small analysis. I hope it was to your taste. See you on Monday, guys. Bye.